New genetic evidence suggests that our ancestors went through a severe population collapse that left just 1,000 individuals standing.
There are over 8 billion humans on Earth. We are everywhere. But what if all of us, our entire species, was reduced to a group so small it could fit in a single high school? New evidence shows this exact thing happened. 900,000 years ago, 99% of our ancestors vanished. For over 100,000 years, only 1,280 people kept humanity alive. The crazy part, the same forces that caused this near-extinction event are back, and our planet is showing the exact same warning signs right now. Humanity's darkest hour. Today, there are over 8 billion humans living on Earth. We're everywhere. We've built skyscrapers, sent machines to Mars, and created the internet. We dominate this planet like no species ever has. However, if you had looked at the world 900,000 years ago, the picture would have been shockingly different. There were barely 1,280 humans left alive on the entire planet. Not 1.28 million, not 128,000, just 1,280 breeding individuals. That's it. The entire future of humanity hanging by a thread so thin, it's almost impossible to believe we're here today. That's what happened to our entire species. Except it wasn't a split second. It was 117,000 years of barely hanging on. And here's the really crazy part. Nobody knew this happened until 2023. See, scientists had always suspected humans went through some kind of population crash in our distant past. Our genetic diversity is weirdly low compared to other animals. Chimpanzees, who live in small groups scattered across Africa, have way more genetic variation than all 8 billion humans combined. That's not normal. That's the signature of a bottleneck. But nobody knew how severe it was. Nobody knew it almost ended everything before it really began. The story starts with researchers at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. They were running genetic analysis on modern human populations, trying to understand our evolutionary history. Standard stuff. They were looking at DNA from over 3,000 people from around the world, tracking genetic changes backward through time like a molecular clock. Then they saw something weird in the data. Around 900,000 years ago, the genetic signatures just collapse. It's like watching a movie where suddenly 99% of the actors disappear from the screen. The mathematical models were screaming that something terrible happened, but the numbers were so extreme at first they thought it had to be an error, a glitch in the analysis. Because if these calculations were right, then human ancestors were reduced to a population smaller than a typical high school. They spent years double-checking, triple-checking, running the analysis again and again with different methods. And get this, every time, the same result. 98.7% of human ancestors were gone around 930,000 years ago. And the survivors stayed at critically low numbers for over 100,000 years. That's longer than modern humans have even existed as a species. Now you might think, okay, so our ancestors went through a tough time, big deal. Species bounce back from near extinction all the time, right? Wrong. When populations get this small, they don't usually bounce back, they vanish. Mathematical models show that once you're down to around 1,000 individuals, you're in what biologists call the extinction vortex. Genetic problems pile up. Inbreeding increases. Random disasters like a single bad drought or a new disease can remove the whole group. Most species that hit numbers this low just vanish forever. But somehow our ancestors didn't vanish. For 117,000 years, they held on. Through ice ages, through droughts, through the extinction of countless other species, a tiny population of early humans spread across who knows where, kept the flame of humanity alive when it should have been snuffed out. What makes this discovery even more incredible is the timing. 900,000 years ago puts us right in the middle of what geologists call the early middle Pleistocene transition. This was when Earth's climate went completely insane. Before this period, ice ages came and went in relatively predictable 41,000-year cycles. The planet would get cold, ice sheets would grow, then things would warm up again. Tough, but manageable. But here's the catch. Around 900,000 years ago, everything changed. The Ice Age cycles shifted to brutal 100,000-year patterns, glaciers became massive, covering huge chunks of the northern continents. Sea levels dropped by hundreds of feet. Ocean temperatures plummeted. And in Africa, where our ancestors lived, the climate became incredibly harsh and dry. Picture this. You're an early human, maybe Homo erectus or one of their descendants, living in what used to be lush woodland. Over generations, your world is transforming into an arid wasteland. Water sources are disappearing, the animals you hunt are vanishing, plant foods are becoming scarce, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse. For thousands and thousands of years, this is what scientists call a perfect storm for mass extinction. And that's exactly what happened to most human populations. They were gone. Only a tiny group somewhere in Africa managed to survive. We don't know where exactly, we don't know how, but they did. The mystery of how they survived is even stranger than the event itself. The ghost population. So how did they do it? How did a group of just 1,280 people manage to maintain a stable population for over 100,000 years? These are the questions that keep scientists up at night. What did that actually look like? Living through 117,000 years of evolutionary hell? Let's go back. Way back. It's 930,000 years ago and the world is ending. Not in some dramatic explosion or asteroid impact, it's ending slowly, brutally, one failed harvest at a time. You're part of a small band of early humans, maybe 30 or 40 individuals. Your species doesn't even have a name yet. Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis? Scientists still argue about the details. What matters is you're human enough that your children's children's children, thousands of generations later, will eventually become us. And right now you're watching your world disappear. The forests where your parents hunted are turning into scrubland. The scrubland is turning into desert. Rivers that ran year-round are now seasonal streams, then just dry beds marked with cracked mud. Your band moves constantly, following water sources that keep drying up, following herds that keep getting smaller, following hope that keeps getting dimmer. This isn't a drought. Droughts end. This is the new normal. The Earth's orbital patterns have shifted into a nightmare configuration. Ice sheets in the north are growing massive, locking up so much water that sea levels drop by hundreds of feet. The Mediterranean becomes a series of smaller lakes. Land bridges appear between continents. But it's not the ice that's harming your people. It's what the ice does to Africa. See, when huge ice sheets form in the north, they create a kind of atmospheric dam weather patterns that used to bring regular rains to Africa get disrupted. The monsoons that fed the continent's rivers become weak and erratic. What used to be woodland becomes grassland. Grassland becomes desert. And desert becomes nothing. Scientists have a name for what happened to Africa during this period: aridification. The continent didn't just get drier, it got catastrophically drier. Fossil evidence shows that most of the large mammals went extinct. Antelope species that had thrived for millions of years just vanished. Elephant populations crashed. When the big animals are gone, everything else follows. Predators starve, scavengers starve, and anything that depended on hunting or scavenging, like early humans, faces a choice: adapt or perish. Most chose poorly. But your small band, your group of 1,280 individuals scattered across the continent, you found something the others missed. Maybe it was a mountain range that still caught enough rainfall to support a few trees. Maybe it was an underground aquifer that kept springs flowing when everything else dried up. Maybe it was a rift valley that created its own microclimate. Whatever it was, it worked for 117,000 years. Now let's talk about what working actually meant. Forget everything you think you know about human evolution being a steady march toward progress. There was no progress during the bottleneck. There was only survival. Your band probably lived in groups of 20 to 30 people, extended families. Everyone related to everyone else within a few generations. You had to be. With only 1,280 breeding individuals total, you couldn't afford to be picky about who you partnered with. Inbreeding was inevitable. Genetic disorders were probably common. Birth defects, developmental problems, reduced fertility, all the consequences of a gene pool that's way too small. But somehow you persisted. The daily routine was brutal. Wake up, find water, find food, don't get harmed. Repeat for 100,000 years. Water came first, always. In a landscape where most streams ran dry half the year, knowing where to find reliable water sources meant the difference between life and passing. Your people probably developed an almost supernatural ability to read the land, to spot signs of underground water, to predict which seasonal streams would flow longest. Food was harder. With most of the large game gone, you couldn't rely on hunting the way your ancestors had. You became what anthropologists call dietary generalists. You ate everything insects, always insects. Termites, crickets, beetle larvae. Pound for pound, insects are some of the most nutritious food sources on the planet, and they reproduce quickly. You ate roots, tubers, anything that grew underground where it was protected from the heat and drought. You learned which plants were edible during different seasons, which ones were toxic unless prepared properly, which ones could be stored for lean times. And occasionally, when you got lucky, you found meat. Not the massive woolly mammoths your ancestors hunted in groups of dozens, those were long gone, but smaller animals. A young antelope separated from its herd, an injured zebra. This is where fire became crucial. Early humans had been using fire for hundreds of thousands of years, but during the bottleneck, fire wasn't just useful. It was the difference between life and passing. Cooking meat made it safer to eat, taking care of parasites and bacteria that could wipe out your entire family. More importantly, cooking broke down tough proteins and made nutrients more available. But fire did more than just improve your diet. It extended your day. With fire, your band could stay active after sunset. You could work on tools, repair shelters, share information about where you'd found water or food. Most importantly, you could strengthen social bonds. And social bonds were everything during the bottleneck. With groups this small, you couldn't afford conflict. Every individual was precious. Lose one adult to fighting or accidents, and the whole band was weakened. Lose several, and you might not survive the next bad season. So you developed cooperation skills that would make modern diplomats jealous. You learned to share resources, resolve disputes, and care for the sick and injured instead of abandoning them. But here's the thing that really blows your mind. The fossil record from this period is almost completely empty. Between 950,000 and 650,000 years ago, there are hardly any human fossils found anywhere in Africa or Europe. For a long time, anthropologists called this the fossil gap and couldn't explain it. Now we know why. There simply weren't many humans around to leave fossils behind. With only 1,280 breeding individuals scattered across who knows how much territory, the chances of any of them passing in conditions that would preserve their bones for hundreds of thousands of years were incredibly small. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, except there are barely any needles, and the haystack is the size of a continent. The genetic evidence is clear. The ancestors of all modern humans, plus Neanderthals and Denisovans, went through this extreme bottleneck. We are all descendants of those 1,280 survivors. Scientists estimate that we lost about 65% of our total genetic diversity. That's an enormous amount. In a twisted way, our weakness is proof of our greatest triumph. Every genetic vulnerability we carry is evidence that our ancestors were tough enough to survive when survival seemed impossible. But the bottleneck didn't just shrink our gene pool, it changed our very DNA. Humanity 2.0. The story doesn't end with just survival. The most incredible part is what happened next. Here's where the story gets even more mind-bending. During this bottleneck period, something unbelievable happened to human genetics. Two of our ancestral chromosomes fused together, just merged into one. This is why humans have 46 chromosomes while our closest relatives, chimpanzees and gorillas, have 48. Chromosome fusion is incredibly rare. It happens maybe once in millions of years, and it happened right in the middle of our near-extinction event. This wasn't a coincidence. See, when populations are very small, unusual genetic changes can spread through the entire group much faster than normal. If one individual had this chromosome fusion and survived to reproduce, their children would carry it. And in a population of only 1,280 people, a genetic change like this could become universal within a few generations. Today, every human on Earth carries this fused chromosome. All 8 billion of us. It's chromosome 2, and it contains the genetic signature of those desperate 117,000 years. Scientists can actually point to the exact spot where the fusion happened. They can see the molecular scars. It's like forensic evidence from the most important crime scene in human history. But the chromosome fusion did more than just reduce our chromosome count. Some researchers believe it may have triggered changes in brain development. Genes near the fusion site affect neural function. It's possible, even likely, that the genetic shakeup during the bottleneck contributed to the evolution of larger, more complex human brains. Think about that. Our intelligence, our ability to create art and technology, our capacity for language. All of it might trace back to a genetic accident that happened when there were barely 1,000 humans left on Earth. When population sizes are extremely small, evolution doesn't work the way it normally does. Usually, genetic changes spread slowly, but in a population of 1,280 individuals, evolution moves at lightning speed. Beneficial traits can spread through the entire group within a few generations. For 117,000 years, our ancestors were basically living in an evolutionary pressure cooker. Only the smartest, toughest, most adaptable individuals survived to pass on their genes. Generation after generation of intense natural selection, selecting for exactly the traits that would later make humans so successful. Problem-solving ability, social cooperation, tool use, communication skills, the capacity to learn and adapt quickly. All of these traits were probably being refined and amplified during those 117,000 years. The genetic bottleneck wasn't just something our ancestors survived, it was something that made them and us who we are. And then, around 813,000 years ago, something changed. The first signs were subtle. Slightly more reliable rainfall, grasslands beginning to expand again, animal populations starting to recover. The extreme phase of the climate crisis was ending, but by this time our people weren't the same species that had entered the bottleneck. 117,000 years of intense natural selection had transformed them. They were smarter, more cooperative, and better adapted. When the climate began to improve, they were ready. Population growth was explosive. Within a few thousand years, the descendants of those survivors had spread across Africa and beyond. And get this, they weren't just one big happy family. The bottleneck had set the stage for the most important speciation event in our lineage. Around 800,000 years ago, that single population of survivors began splitting into 3 distinct groups, 3 separate evolutionary paths that would become the 3 most successful human species in history. 1 modern humans, who stayed in Africa. 2 Neanderthals, who moved into Europe and West Asia. 3 the mysterious Denisovans, who moved into East Asia. Think of it like this. You take a river and force it through the narrowest possible channel for 100,000 years. All that pressure builds up. Then suddenly you remove the constraint. The water doesn't just flow, it erupts in every new direction. That's what happened to human evolution. The bottleneck forged us, and the recovery unleashed us. All 3 groups carried the genetic signature of the bottleneck, the fused chromosome, the reduced diversity. But they also began developing their own unique traits, leading to an explosion of technological innovation. In Africa, stone tools became complex and standardized. In Europe, Neanderthals became master hunters, developing hafted tools and spears. In Asia, Denisovans adapted to high altitudes and maybe even became skilled seafarers. For hundreds of thousands of years, these 3 human species, all children of the same disaster, ruled the planet. Eventually, only one would be left. Our own species, Homo sapiens. We had the flexibility and adaptability forged in that crisis, which allowed us to outcompete and absorb our cousins. By 20,000 years ago, we were the only humans left. The descendants of the 1,280 survivors had inherited the Earth, but the force that almost ended us is not gone. It's a cycle. Humanity's next filter. This is the part of the story that most people don't realize. The discovery of the 900,000 year ago bottleneck isn't just history. It's a warning. The title of this video isn't just for drama, the event is happening again, but this time the cause is different. And the vanishing looks different too. So here's the deal. What caused the Great Collapse 900,000 years ago? A massive planet-wide shift in the climate. The early Middle Pleistocene transition. It was a natural cycle. The Earth's orbit and tilt changed, plunging the world into a new and brutal ice age pattern that caused extreme aridification in Africa. It got very dry, very fast, and it stayed that way for over 100,000 years. The planet's environment changed faster than the species living on it, including our ancestors, could adapt. And 99% of them vanished. Now look at our world today. What is the single biggest story? A massive planet-wide shift in the climate. Of course, the cause is different. It's not a natural orbital shift. It's us. We are pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere at a rate the planet has never seen. We are causing the fastest climate transition in millions of years. And the effects? They sound chillingly familiar. Extreme droughts in some areas, massive flooding in others, wildfires burning entire continents, ice sheets melting at a terrifying rate, changing ocean currents and weather patterns. Basically, we are recreating the same type of environmental chaos that caused the last great human bottleneck. We are pushing the planet's systems out of balance just like the orbital shift did 900,000 years ago. But here's the catch. It's happening again doesn't mean 99% of people will vanish overnight. The nature of the vanishing is different. First, look at the other species. We are currently in the middle of the 6th mass extinction. Scientists estimate that dozens, maybe hundreds of species are going extinct every single day. This is a vanishing of biodiversity, the very web of life that supports human civilization. Our ancestors suffered when their food sources vanished. We are actively destroying our own food sources. Second, let's talk about the human vanishing. Everyone's obsessed with the idea of overpopulation, 8 billion people. But in many of the most developed countries, Japan, South Korea, Italy, much of Europe, birth rates are collapsing. Not just slowing down, collapsing. These populations are set to shrink by half or more in the next few generations. This is a new, modern vanishing. It's not from a lack of food, but from a complex mix of economic and social pressures. So we have a perfect storm. On one side, we have a climate crisis that threatens to create massive resource shortages, just like the ancient one. On the other side, we have a strange vanishing in many parts of the human population, while other parts continue to grow, creating massive instability. The crazy part is, we are triggering this ourselves. Our ancestors were victims of a planet they couldn't understand. We are the cause of our own crisis. We have the data. We know what's happening. The bottleneck 900,000 years ago was a filter. It let only the most adaptable and cooperative humans through. The question is, are we facing a new filter? And will the traits that get us through this time be the same? Our ancestors survived because they were smart. We have to be wise. The 1,280 in all of us. Look around you, right now. Look at the world we've built. Skyscrapers that pierce the clouds, satellites that connect us in an instant, libraries containing the accumulated knowledge of millennia. We've composed symphonies, we've walked on the moon, we've decoded the very building blocks of life itself. So here we are, 8 billion of us. It's easy to look at our sprawling, complex global civilization and think that we were always destined for this, that we are the most successful species in the history of life on Earth, that our dominance was inevitable. But what if that's all a lie? What if our success, our very existence, hinged on a thread so thin it's almost invisible? What if, for a time spanning longer than all of recorded history, humanity was an endangered species, teetering on the absolute brink of extinction? Because a new discovery has revealed a secret about our past so shocking, it changes everything we thought we knew about ourselves. It turns out that every single one of us, every person on this planet, from the most crowded city to the most remote island, carries the genetic signature of just 1,280 individuals. Let that number sink in. 1,280. That's not a city, that's not even a small town, that is the size of a large high school. Imagine if every person on Earth vanished tomorrow except for the students and staff of a single high school. And from that tiny, terrified group, we had to rebuild everything. That is our story. That is the reality of our past. A groundbreaking study in 2023 dropped this bombshell on the scientific community. Using new genetic modeling, researchers peered back into our deep ancestry and found a population bottleneck of terrifying proportions. For 117,000 years, let me repeat that, 117,000 years, the total number of breeding humans on planet Earth hovered at just 1,280. For over 4,000 generations, we weren't a successful species. We were a failed experiment hanging on by our fingernails. So what happened? What could possibly drive humanity, which had already spread across parts of Africa and Eurasia, to the absolute brink? The planet turned against us. This period, starting around 930,000 years ago, was a time of brutal, chaotic climate change. We now call it the mid-Pleistocene transition. Glaciers advanced and retreated, seasons became wildly unpredictable, and the world our ancestors knew simply broke. Vast regions of the planet were gripped by catastrophic droughts that would have lasted for centuries, wiping out the plants and animals they relied on. It was a world of starvation, a world of bitter cold, a world of desperation. It's estimated that 98.7% of the human population was wiped out, gone. Tiny, isolated groups of these early humans huddling together for warmth, trying to figure out where their next meal was coming from, while the world froze and starved around them. That was us, for 117,000 years. And this is the part that stops you cold when you really think about it. Your DNA contains sequences that survived the worst climate disaster our lineage ever faced, genes that were tested by 117,000 years of near extinction and came through. Think about that, the way your brain works, the way you solve problems, the way you instinctively cooperate with strangers, the way you learn language. All of it was shaped, forged, and pressure tested by those desperate millennia. They had to be smart, they had to be adaptable, and most of all, they had to work together. The individuals who were selfish, who couldn't communicate, who couldn't innovate or adapt. They died, they froze, they starved, and they left no descendants. We are the children of the ones who figured it out. You are walking proof that sometimes, against all odds, life finds a way. But this is where we have to get down to earth. People watching this are looking for answers. Is this all true? Are we missing a key detail? How could we possibly know this? The thing is, the discovery from 2023 is just the beginning. It's so powerful because it explains things that have baffled experts for decades. You've heard of the fossil gap, right? That strange period in our history where human-like fossils just disappear? This bottleneck explains why. There were so few of us, we barely left a trace for archaeologists to find. It also explains our weird lack of genetic diversity. You might think 8 billion people would be incredibly diverse, but genetically, we are bizarrely similar. We have less genetic diversity than a single troop of chimpanzees in a single forest. Why? Because we all came from the same tiny group of 1,280 people. And it might even explain one of the most mysterious events in our DNA, the fusion of chromosome 2. Our ancestors at some point had 2 chromosomes fused together to become our modern chromosome 2. This is a massive, risky mutation. In a large population, it would be diluted and vanish. But in a tiny, bottlenecked population of just a few hundred, it could take hold and spread to everyone. Our ancestors survived their climate crisis. Can we survive ours? Let us know what you think below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.